and thank you for joining us today. We're going to get a talk from Kauai from Aaron Swink, Kaili Shayler, and Heather Ylitalo-Ward. So they're all Division of Aquatic Resources employees that are based on the island of Kauai. So with that, I'll hand it over to you, Aaron.
All right, thanks, Kim, for the introduction. Aloha, everyone. My name is Aaron Swink. I'm the education specialist for Kauai Island with the Division of Aquatic Resources, and we're excited today to talk with you about some of these issues about invasive species. I know we've had a lot of good talks this last month. So everyone's been sharing what they're doing to do this great work to help, control invasive species and stop the spread. So so we're going to be talking about some of the aquatic aquatic invasives here on Kauai. And again, my name is Aaron Swink, and then I'm going to be joined by Kaili Shayler and Heather Ylitalo-Ward. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about invasive species. I'm sure that if you're in this talk, you probably have a pretty good idea of, invasive species and the problems that they cause and all that. I think when we hear invasive species, I'm curious, like, what's the first thing that comes to your mind? Is it like the enemies of the forest, like ginger or guava, or maybe like the ones in your yard that are like so annoying, like guinea grass or halikoa, or maybe some kind of a disease even, or mosquitoes. So what is it that comes to your mind? Well, invasive species is just defined as anything that causes ecological or economic or human health harm outside of its, when it's moved to an area where it's not native, outside of its non-native range. And 59% of species that have been introduced to the United States in the 20th century have caused ecological or economic harm. So there's a lot of invasive species out there. And aquatic invasive species are a major area of emerging concern, especially. This figure is pretty old, and from 2005, the costs were $6 billion annually. And that was before like some of these really costly aquatic invasives like zebra mussels got into more and more waterways in the US. So that has definitely gone up in the last decade and a half. So what are we dealing with here in Hawaii? Well, we have a lot of different invasive species that that we're dealing with. They're aquatic species. So kind of breaking them down into different groups. We've got seaweeds. There's a lot of seaweeds, invasive algae, especially not as much here on Kauai, but we do have some. We have the hookweed, and then Heather's going to be actually talking more about one that is that we just found recently. So perhaps even a new emerging threat. But Oahu has long struggled with some of these, like the gorilla ogo and stuff. We got some videos on that coming up. But then the fish, so, tilapia were brought here to control other things in the ditches. So it's kind of like one of those things and then they ended up becoming a problem. And Kaili's going to be sharing about some of the issues with tilapia. Floating plants, so these are ones that often escape from ornamental ponds and aquariums. I'm going to be talking about Salvinia, which is a problem here on Kauai, but there's also other ones that are kind of emerging concerns here that Heather's also going to mention. And then invertebrates. So, everything from prawns to apple snails. Anyone who's worked in the Lo'i knows how annoying apple snails are, and, taro farmers know how much damage they cause. But there's even a lot of things that we might not think of, like invasive corals and invasive sponges that got here probably from ballast water or biofouling of, marine debris or something like that. So there's a lot of these, we have a lot that we're dealing with, and we have a lot that they're continuing to show up. We have new ones that are coming, and it takes vigilance to keep watch over these, to help keep these from getting out of control. So what is Dar doing? So one project is the super sucker. that has been used on Oahu, in Kaneohe Bay, and other places. And at its peak, it collected over 100,000 pounds of invasive algae, and you can see it going right there. And to me, I've not used the super sucker, but I want to because it looks really satisfying. I mean, just look at that. So this is a video of using this super sucker to collect a lot of this invasive gorilla ogo on the in Kaneohe Bay. And then once it's collected, though, it'll just grow right back if it's not kept in check. So Dar has also has a hatchery for native sea urchins, collector urchins. And this first picture there shows eggs being collected. So we actually collect the eggs and then raise them in these tanks where the eggs are hatched and then transitioned into larvae where they're fed, plankton. And then eventually, once they get to be a certain size, they're given a substrate to grow on, and then outplanted. So there's been about over 600,000 of these urchins have been outplanted, and they've done a really great job of keeping the invasive algae, especially in Kaneohe Bay, in check. So it's really a cool way of kind of partnering with a natural, a natural predator of these things to be able to, or herbivore, I should say, not predator, a natural grazer of these invasive algae to keep them in check. And we're also doing monitoring. So using a technology called eDNA, which stands for environmental DNA. So whenever an organism emits waste or dies, it releases some of its DNA into the water, and we can actually monitor for specific species just by collecting a water sample. And we're also, we have a program to monitor and protect the islands from invasive organisms that might show up from ships, either attached to their hulls or marine debris, or coming from the ballast water when they discharge their ballast. Okay, so we're going to talk about three kind of specifics that are here on Kauai. So I'm going to briefly just talk about Salvinia, which is an invasive fern. A lot of these slides came from Dan Lager, and I'm going to be kind of clicking through them fairly quick, but we'll have some time for questions at the end. So it is an aquatic fern, and it's used a lot in koi ponds and things like that as just to provide shade or just beauty. It's an attractive plant, but it's a super noxious weed. This is a picture of Lake Wilson from about 20 years ago. This lake went from covered, like a small population of it, to completely covered in just a period of months, which gives you an idea of how fast it can reproduce. And it cost over $1 million to remove it, and it took an incredible amount of work, both heavy equipment and the use of herbicides. So the most important thing is to keep this out of our waterways. Unfortunately, it is here on Kauai. And there's reports in 2016 about that it was getting kind of bad in the Kilauea stream on the north shore of Kauai. And so Dar partnered with a couple different agencies to actually go and survey and then remove it, and to collect eDNA samples from streams all around the island to see if it's also present in places, because access to a lot of our streams can be fairly difficult here on Kauai. A lot of times they're too rocky to really kayak up, and they're all on private land. So what was found is that on the North Shore, it was found in two streams, at Kilauea and another stream that's close by, Kumu Stream. And then on the east side, in the Kapa'a Stream, which comes out at Kealia Beach, and the Waikaea Canal, which is where the Kapa'a boat ramp is, if you're familiar with those spots. A eDNA signature was also found at Waimea. So this is a visual survey of the Kilauea Stream. that was taken in April 2018, immediately before the big flood. And you can see that following the flood, it greatly decreased, which makes sense because it grows in these big floating mats, and it was basically blasted out by, the 2018 flood. But by February of 2019, it was starting to regrow. And we actually did a survey, we don't have a slide for it, but just the other day we went up there and did kind of a quick look, and it is definitely regrowing in pretty solid mat all the way along the eastern bank. Kapa'a Stream also found greatly reduced populations following the 2018 flood, but it didn't totally eliminate it. There's a lot of invasive grass, like molasses grass on the banks, that kind of holds the fragments so that it can regrow from those little fragments. And it is regrowing there. This is really close to my house, and I've definitely noticed the mats getting a lot thicker lately. So what are we going to do? Well, we know that it's going to be somewhat helped by the big floods, but we'd like to be able to get it completely out of the river. And so we're going to have to work with the community in order to do that. So what are our options? We want to work with the community to talk about different plans, set up some work days, have targeted removal efforts where we actually go out, collect as much of the individuals. I know we herbicide, and people kind of like, whoa. So we want to, make sure that if that's something that if the community wants to do, that's a community-led effort, and what it would take to do that. Right now, we don't have any plans to use herbicide, but that is a possibility. And then, and then just continued monitoring using the eDNA. Okay, so I'm going to turn it over now to Kaili. He's going to talk about the tilapia outbreak on the Nepali area. Kaili.
Hi guys, sorry you guys can't see me. I'm working from home, and my internet bandwidth is a little slow, so you guys are just gonna have to hear my beautiful voice today. So basically, I wasn't sure if you guys have heard, but about a year and a half ago, we had a movement of a large aggregation of black-chin tilapia that kind of came out of the ditch system during one of the big floods, and out in the Mana Flat, out in Kekaha, and it started shifting and moving towards the northern part and northwestern part of the Nepali coast, and is kind of following the freshwater gradient and as it moved down Ylitalo region area. And so basically these slides are just gonna, and how we kind of took the approach that we did, and what we're still planning on doing with it. And yeah, there'll be time for questions after. Okay, thank you. All right, next slide. Okay, so tilapia. So tilapia is native to the eastern African coast, and it wasn't actually brought native here. So it was brought here to control other invasive or other aquatic pests for agricultural use. Next slide. And so the big deal here is, of course, it's not a native fish to our native environments that we have here. And the bigger problem is that as a young juvenile fish, which they stay juvenile up until breeding size about maybe 4 or 5 inches, and at that breeding size, once they hit there, up until there, they're kind of carnivorous. So the babies, so like the baby hinana and stuff like that, or tiny little baby ahole recruits that are just kind of coming back to the shores. And so at a young age, go after those, and then as they get older, they shift their diet to more limu. So the limu part isn't that bad. There's a lot of turf limu that they kind of graze upon, but the problem is the numbers, and at that older stage, they kind of like push out other fish. And that's definitely what we've noticed out at Nu'ulo'olo. And if you're not familiar with Nu'ulo'olo, it's this real tiny, tight reef system. And it has on one side of it near shore is a flat reef that has all these honeycombs that's underneath the reef. And at high tide, it floods over with salt water. And it stays with salt water, but underneath it, there's freshwater input from a spring that comes from the back of Nu'ulo'olo. And basically, as they're able to, the tilapia are making nests underneath that and inside that reef system, and they're making nests that are getting prolific to the point where they're not able to be removed, and they're actually out competing and pushing out the oholehole and the aveo that are normally found in those pukas. And so next slide, please. So what we did was we organized an effort to see what they're studying, or to see what they're eating, and to do kind of like a breeding survey to see how much potential breeders were there. And what we found was that at the time, it wasn't really spawning time for them, but there were old nests. And so next slide, please. So what we wanted to do was we worked with the communities, and we put together a community-led effort to do a roundup of what was there on the reef at least, and try to get whatever was off that reef off, and see what came back. And we organized with a bunch of fishermen from the west side to come out and join us in doing huki. And we did a bunch of different methods, and what we found that worked best was using smaller mesh net of seine nets with chain on the bottom of them instead of lead weight. The larger fish were strong enough to lift the lead line on these nets, and as they lifted the lead line, the smaller fish were able to just escape. And also, throw nets, it wasn't really that good during the day, and we think it's because of the predation in their natural environment of, they normally get preyed upon by aerial predators like, birds and stuff. So anything coming in from above, like a net opening up, they kind of just scatter or gone. So during the day, it didn't really work too well, but at night we noticed that, they kind of aggregated towards shore in these larger piles, and we could throw a net on them and, have pretty good success. So we spent a full night doing that, and one day of just hooking, and we pulled out a lot of fish. But what we did notice is, we as a division, we can't do this on our own. So a lot of times these efforts, we have to work with the communities that utilize these resources in these places, and we can't do it on our own. But for the tilapia, when we went back and looked recently, maybe about 8 months after, we did notice that there was smaller recruits that are starting to turn into the next size into the breeding phase. So they're starting to turn into potential breeders. For us, the next steps, what we really want to do is do another roundup and try to do another community event where we could, to talk to people of how to better use these fish. There's ways to actually use them. People we found that they're actually quite tasty. These tilapias that are in the salt water, they're getting flushed out. So they're not like freshwater tilapia that you buy in the store, you know. They actually taste like manini, and they taste the same fried. So just getting people different uses for it. They're a good slide bait for ulua. We want to try to use different methods of gathering. So we want to try to work with some of the community to reintroduce traditional gathering methods of using fish potions, and they're basically just, you know, fish beer and fish liquor that gets them drunk and gets them all sleepy and brings them to the surface. But it's using traditional plants. Want to like try to do a little bit more nests that are deep underneath the reef. So next slide. Yeah, so if you anybody that wants to help on Kauai, we have a collection permit that allows you to use small mesh net and other gear that might be considered prohibited in certain restricted areas, and also it allows for the take of bycatch. So if you want to help, you guys can contact me, and allows us to go and target these big tilapia piles around the island, and we can do some removal efforts using a collection permit that I have. And yeah, if you guys have any recipes that you guys are willing to share that might make tilapia taste good, it's something that we really want to get out and try to make use of. So thank you. Next slide.
Okay, everybody. Thank you, Kaili. My name's Heather. I know that it says Aaron Swink, but it's Heather. So I'm just going to talk to you a little bit about a recent possible invasive species in Kalapaki and Kauai. In November, we got a call from a concerned fisherman who said that he had seen carpets of algae in Kalapaki. And so our team, we went out to this spot where he said he saw it, and it's kind of in the Wili Wili Harbor area, and that area is actually extremely murky, and the visibility was terrible, and there's lots of sharks there. So we, you know, our intrepid team, we went out to go investigate, and what we found was exactly what he said, these kind of carpets of algae just covering the substrate there. And we weren't really able to get a great understanding of the extent of it because, like I said, the visibility was pretty low. And at this point, really what we wanted to do was just collect it and see if we could figure out what it was. So we brought it back to our office and we took lots of photos, and this is what it looks like when you look at it closer. And it didn't look like a species that we've seen in Hawaii before. It looked a little bit like Calerpa cerulata. You can see because it's got that sort of ridge on the side of it. But look at those blades. They look really long, right? It doesn't look, you know, if we look at that previous slide, these guys are a bit shorter. So we thought, could it be that guy with Calerpa cerulata, not usually found in Hawaii? It's, you know, more kind of Australia and also in the Atlantic. And then maybe Calerpa bicerulata. But again, we weren't sure. It didn't look exactly alike. So the next step was we decided to send it to UH. The scientists there agreed to do some DNA testing on it to figure out exactly what it was. And what they found was that it's actually a species called Calerpa parvifolia. And you can see the Calerpa cerulata is above in this tree. So, you know, it's related, but it looks like the DNA showed us it's actually Calerpa parvifolia, or at least it's most likely that one. And here's another representation of that. You can see there's something called GenBank where they put all of the sequences of different samples that have been sequenced. And so you can see those red ones there are right in the middle between the other parvifolia. So it looks like that's what it is. But here's a picture of what parvifolia looks like. And it's not a great photo, but this is what I was able to find in the literature. And it looks like, you know, not super rigid like the ones that we found out here. So that's kind of a mystery. But really what we want to know, you know, where did this come from? How could it have gotten to Hawaii? It's not usually, you know, we don't actually know where this strain occurs naturally, but it hasn't been found in Hawaii before. It's possible that it came from the aquarium trade. We do know that other species of Calerpa have been found in Hawaii through the aquarium trade, so they've been introduced previously. And then also, if we look back here at that image I showed you before, those other samples from previous are all from aquarium. So the ones in Hawaii that we found are very closely related to the ones from the aquarium. So it's possible that that's where it came from, which is unfortunate, but it's possible that it got released into the wild. But really what I want to tell you with this story is that what we had a fisherman who saw something and he thought, what is this? This doesn't look natural. So he gave us a call at Dar. We went out to go investigate it. And then since we didn't know what it was, we brought it back and tried to figure out what it was, sent it to the scientists who were able to identify it for us. And now we're going to continue to monitor it to make sure that it's not spreading or figure out the extent of its spread currently. But the most important part about this is the first part. If you see something that you think, what is this? I don't think this looks natural. Make sure you give us a call so that we can protect the Aina out here. So yeah, we want you to help us keep track of these troublemakers too. There's these other species that we want you to keep an eye out for. We know that these are invasive or they can be invasive. So we want to make sure that they're not spreading. The water lettuce, the water hyacinth, elodia, and water milfoil. If you see these and you see these plants getting, you know, large populations, please call Dar or KISC and let us know so that we can track that spread and make sure that it doesn't become a big problem, because they do have a tendency to become problematic. Yeah, and so that's it for us. Mahalo, everybody, and please feel free to ask any questions.
Great, thank you guys so much for all the so if anyone has questions, you can go ahead and either type them into the chat or into the question and answer, and I'll give you guys a couple of minutes to get some questions going too. I guess I'll start with a question. Kaili, what type of tilapia was found at Nualolo?
It's black chin tilapia. So we have in Hawaii, there's multiple varieties. I think what we were hearing on the news with Big Island with their tilapia tournament, they're targeting more Nile tilapia. The one that we have here is black chin. It gets to be about between, the biggest that I've really seen is, you know, 8 inches, almost 7. And those are really found in the big river systems, you know, that you can't really get to, like Wailua, Hanalei, in some places.
So it really was a good example of how even freshwater fish can tolerate higher salinities too.
Right. Like for us, it was really unique because in the literature there wasn't really a lot of information talking about. I mean, there's information about talking about tilapia in estuarine environments, like that brackish water mix, but not in these high salinity environments that are like almost like that we see a lot on our reef system, and what we found was that, if there is the tiniest little bit of freshwater signature, they're able to osmoregulate and be able to survive in those environments for up to like a couple weeks. And then, by that time, there's a little bit more fresh water from another place, that makes it way down the coast. So, it's pretty unique how they're able to survive and adapt. And once they locked into that area, Nu'ulo'olo, it's kind of getting a little hard to get them out, but we have some different methods for getting them out of those pukas, and we're eager to go try them out.
Great. So it looks like we have some questions in the chat. So Randy asked, where do you post your volunteer days or events?
So, as well with everything, COVID has thrown our volunteer, events into non-existent, into the rubbish lately, just because we haven't really been able to do that. But things are changing. So as we're kind of coming out of a lot of these restrictions, and we're able to do more in-person stuff, we are hoping to restart a lot of these plans. So keep an eye out. What we're going to be partnering with KISC. So the Kauai Invasive Species Committee, to do some work at Kilauea with the Salvinia, hopefully soon, and with the Hawaii Island Land Trust. So a good way to keep tabs of that is to actually follow KISC on Instagram or Facebook, because they post a lot of really good information, like when they're going to be having these kind of work days. So we're going to kind of hopefully be partnering with them to help get the word out. You can also call. I'm going to put, so this is my number. I'm going to put my number in the chat and my email. So you can always just email me, and I can put you in contact with the right person, or I can give you, an update on volunteer work days. But yes, I'm sorry we don't have like a calendar right now going. Stay tuned, check back, and hopefully we'll have all that more available.
Great, thanks, Aaron. We have a question from Graham. Is there any information on the spread of the convict cichlid, Amatilania species? I recently saw for the first time down in Koloa. Had only heard of Kapa'a area before.
I haven't.
Go ahead, Kaili.
About that either. So right on. That's what it takes. Is so our team is relatively small, and like a lot of times we're out doing not just freshwater surveys, but a big chunk of our time is spent out in the marine environment and on boats and doing marine surveys, and a lot of times we're not able to get everywhere. So right on. Whereabouts in Koloa did you see it? Was it more towards like the landing area or towards the harbor? If you could just write that in the chat, it'd be awesome. Mahalo nui.
Yeah, I guess that's like a great way of exactly what Kaili said. It's we really are counting on the community and the water users for the reports. And so you can also email our Aquatic Invasive Species email. We are based on Oahu, but Jen, would you mind typing that into the chat? The Aquatic Invasive Species email, that's a great way to also report something on any of the islands, because then I'll get in touch with the specific team for the island. But so Puakea also is asking a broad political question. Why are these potential very invasive species still allowed to be sold for the aquarium trade?
You could probably answer that more completely than I can, Kim, but I do. Some of them are illegal. So for example, the water lettuce. So if we go back to this slide right here. So this one right here, this is actually, this is against the law. It's considered a noxious weed. And so is the Salvinia. So those are both prohibited. But for example, it's not illegal to have them. So like, for example, this water lettuce, this is in a ditch. So this picture right here is a ditch that's over Nukuli'i Beach. And right next to that is Kauai Beach Resort. And I've been wondering about where this population of water lettuce keeps coming from, because we get a big flood and it seems to wash out, but then it comes back. And so I snooped around on the Kauai Beach Resort property, and lo and behold, I found one little decorative pond off, kind of to the side, and there's the water lettuce in there. It's not in the koi ponds, it's not in the big golf course ponds, but it's in this one little area. So so all it takes is a small little, someone's got a koi pond that overflows and it can get in there. So I don't know, Kim, if you have anything you'd like to add.
Yeah, I think so. Luckily, there has been things made illegal like the pistia, or the water lettuce, and the Salvinia. It takes a lot to get, so it's kind of interesting because there are restrictions on selling and buying certain species, but not all species are listed as such. And I think also the prioritization of how you get those species on the list, they need to be broadly noxious. So like there's federal regulations, but then there's also Hawaii specific regulations. And one kind of overarching rule that's pretty organized is the import regulations. And so this is any non-domestic live animal import. And that is where our team is trying to get some invasives that aren't currently here, encouraging them to be listed by doing risk assessments of their potential to invade our specific environments. But another answer is if it's already here and established in our natural systems, it's less likely to become prohibited if it's not already so. So it's complex. There's many different departments as well as agendas. So for a good example is like aquaculture. Aquaculture is a better example of, we need sustainable food, and the species that might be great for providing that sustainable food may also have invasive tendencies. So it's just that check and balance of weighing the potential benefit versus the cost. And a reminder, so as the Aquatic Invasive Species team, of course, we're always erring on the side of caution and would prefer there not to be any non-native species, allowed live that have a likelihood of invasion. But sometimes you have to weigh different either economic incentives or sustainable food incentives against the potential risk. Okay, so Skippy had a comment. On Maui, we found tilapia, including red devil and top minnows. Cuban and Mexican top minnows were used for a bait fish program in Kealia. Moving along the south shore from Kealia to Kihei. So another example of, supposedly freshwater fish moving along the shore, which may be estuarine depending on the water inputs.
Oh, all the papillo must be full then, Skippy. That's why they're not biting.
Yeah. And just one other quick comment. We actually, another thing, just kind of giving props to the community. So we actually had a report the other day of this water hyacinth in the Wailua Reservoir. And someone called and was like, hey, I found water hyacinth. They were knowledgeable already. They knew that it was no good. So they're like, I just picked every piece of it up that I could and put it in a trash bag and threw it away. and she sent us pictures, and it was a, you know, like a full trash bag of it. So we've been keeping an eye on it up there, and it's kind of mysterious how it got there. It seems like it's not a real, be kind of a weird spot to like dump a koi pond, you know, leftovers. So we are concerned that it is possibly, you know, these organisms, they have an amazing ability to spread, you know, they stick to like a bird's foot or something like that. So that's, you know, these are ones, these 4 that are on this slide are ones that have established populations here on Kauai in limited places. And so we're like, that's where we know where they're at. So if you know places, other places where there are, then, you know, the water hyacinth and the water lettuce are near the Wailua Golf Course and Nukuli'i area, marine camp area in the ditches. And then this Elodia and water milfoil are known from some ditch systems up on the North Shore in Ha'ena. So if you know places outside of that, we'd definitely be curious to know if it's in other places.
Okay, we have another question from Mia. So this is a question for Heather. If a species like Calerpa has established itself in an area and we don't have access to a supersucker, how do we prevent further spreading of an invasive algae if removal may promote the spread of it due to fragmentation?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Yeah, and you're exactly right that sometimes removal, especially of these Calerpa, like tiny little parts of it can propagate and turn into another, you know, big carpet of it. So making sure that you're removing it extremely carefully and responsibly is important. So, you know, without access to the supersucker, I think at this point, you know, we monitor these Calerpa to see how far they're spreading, and then we work with the invasive species team, the aquatic invasive species team, and figure out a plan of how we can try and remove it. So that we have to just kind of keep monitoring it to decide whether or not we're going to start removal. But of course, you have to be extremely careful with removal.
Yeah, and I guess I'll add to that a little bit, Heather. So depending on the distribution and impact, that's when we would make a decision of what action we could take. So if it's a doable area of removal, then that's when we would take action. Also, when I'm just thinking, I mean, so there's been studies in California, if it's a small enough area and, you know, you deem it to be very impactful, there has been success with Calerpa control using bleach. I know that seems like a extreme kind of, but it was successful in eradication in California. But if I were to think about like a less impactful treatment, maybe just very, very careful in water removal with a mesh bag right there. Yeah, I mean, I think there's no getting around it. I think even with the supersucker, you know, there might be some fragmentation and re-release. It is very minimal, but it's still there. And I think with a lot of species, you have to understand that eradication isn't always possible. And so so even the smothering seaweed in Oahu, it's not eradicated. It's just controlled to a level where the coral can thrive. So that also might have to be a strategy depending on the impact, the area, and the distribution. Okay, and then we have another comment from Megan. She says, aloha Kaili and Kauai AIS crew. She said, there's lots of tilapia in our brackish water ecosystems. Here are hybrids in Ka'au. So she's from the Big Island. In the Ankline Pool at Ho'onua, for example, we see mostly Mozambique tilapia on the south end of Hawaii Island. And they're hoping to use rotenone to get rid of them. Also, a group of the Hui local team tried to get Nile tilapia restricted, but again, there is conflicting priorities. So it's it is technically on restricted list. It's not conditionally approved, so it's on restricted list A and B, and so you have to have a permit to import them. And luckily, with a lot of these things, you do need a permit to import them. So hopefully, that's another like step to prevent introduction. Okay, and then Puakea, is there a public risk document of the risk assessment you had mentioned? I have a PowerPoint on our website. It's internal right now. We're still refining our SOP, but there's also import regulations available on the Department of Agriculture website. So you can know what's prohibited, what's approved for, certain things, and then also what's conditionally approved. Let me just paste that in the chat. And if anyone has any further questions, please add them to the chat or the Q&A.
Great questions. Really am loving the discussion. Thank you for that in the comments. It's awesome.
So here's, I just pasted into the chat a PDF of the PowerPoint evaluating risk assessment tools, but generally our risk assessment will use a risk screening tool, which have been published and peer reviewed, and then that's paired with a literature review and basically just, qualitative analysis as well. Okay, looks like our questions are about finished up. Thank you so much, Aaron, Heather, and Kaili for your wonderful presentation.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks everyone.
Oh, go ahead.
Sorry, I was just going to say thanks everyone who attended.
Yes, thank you. Okay.
Okay.
All right.
I'm going to end it. Aloha.
Aloha.